Magic in most fantasy worlds feels wondrous and grips the imagination, but not all of it feels real. Sometimes it falls apart with a moment's thought. That's the risk we face as world builders. We can spend hours lovingly crafting spells and lore while missing those critical elements that actually holds it all together. Magic can be wondrous, mysterious, or terrifying. Perhaps all three, but it must also make sense. Not sense according to our world, but according to yours. There are three specific areas where magic can quietly unravel your setting. Figuratively, of course. A literal cataclysm can be great world building. And in this video, we're going to explore each of them. They are the implications of magical power, magical wielders, and magical implements. Hi, my name is Jonathan Oldenburg, author of the novel Tears from Iron. I have been grappling with the ramifications of magic in my fantasy world for over 25 years now, and want to help you avoid some of the pitfalls I've experienced while developing worlds that grip the imagination. A quick note before we begin. This is the second of two videos I've released on magic. In the first, we covered the fundamentals, what magic is, what it does, and who can use it. That video focuses on the ramifications of your magical system's internal logic. Today we're stepping beyond its inner workings to examine how it interacts with the world and peoples around it. I've got that other video linked in the description, and it'll be one of the end cards if you haven't checked it out already. So let's get started. First, let's talk about how powerful magic is in your world. Magic can manifest in countless ways, as we discussed in the last video. So to keep this manageable, we'll focus on two big categories: destructive power and healing power. For destruction, ask yourself, how devastating can magic be? A friend of mine, Alexander McCrease, who world builds for RPGs, once provided a perfect analogy. He asked if magic is as powerful as a machine gun, a cannon, or a nuke. Let's add the bow and arrow at the low end. If your magic is only that strong, then on a pre-modern battlefield, it's just one more guy plinking away at the enemy like any other warrior. But if it's equivalent to a machine gun, we've got a problem. At least for the Spartans at Thermopylae, Roman legions at Zama, or Norman knights at Hastings. Dense formations would get chewed up and spit out by your sorcerers, changing the entire face of battle. Armies can persist. Machine guns didn't make them vanish, but massed formations did. Under such conditions, warriors will use cover, rely on ambushes, or adopt looser tactics to avoid getting vaporized. If magic is as powerful as a cannon, the implications shift. Dense formations of infantry persisted into the world of cannons. The Napoleonic Wars and American Civil War both provide fine examples, but castles did not. This is because the strength of castles comes from their height. Towering ramparts provide enormous barriers and allowed archers to rain death upon their enemies. But high walls become the broadside of a barn once big guns show up. Fortifications shrank in height, with Fort McHenry of Star-Spangled Banner fame providing an excellent example. These star forts had low, thick earthen walls designed to absorb punishment, or perhaps magical fire. If wizards can unleash magical nukes, then we're facing a whole additional magnitude of consequence. Armies might not disappear, but they'll reorganize drastically. Early in the Cold War, for example, the US built pentomic divisions, decentralized units designed to keep fighting even if parts were annihilated in nuclear fire. But considering battlefield consequences is only the first step. The nature of a military shapes the society that fields it. Let's look at ancient Greece for three examples. Thessaly in northern Greece fielded elite cavalry because they had the pasture land to support such forces. Horse warriors are expensive to equip, so only a small element of this society could be in the military. These men had all of the power, literally, resulting in highly centralized city-states. You'll see something similar with knights of the medieval period. Sparta was too rugged for cavalry. Instead, it relied on hoplites, citizen soldiers with spears, shields, and armor. The price for such equipment was still costly, but not nearly as expensive as for the cavalry, leading to a more egalitarian political structure, at least for its relatively small citizen population. Athens, on the other hand, was the democracy of the ancient world. Was it because Athens was somehow more enlightened than Sparta? Hardly. It was because Athens' source of power lay in its navy. A trireme requires 170 rowers, and they fielded about 200 at Salamis, meaning about 34,000 men. Equipping a rower isn't expensive, so they drew on the broader population. Every man pulled his weight in battles, both figuratively and literally, so they each had a claim to political power. As a brief tangent, because I can't help nerding out a bit, this is the reason why the arming of citizens in the post-medieval period is so important. Once you put weapons in the hands of the greater masses of people, you can't maintain an absolute monarchy anymore, nor can aristocracy hold as much power, and the House of Lords in Britain is eclipsed by the House of Commons. So what does this mean for your world? The destructive power of your spellcasters shapes the social and political structures around them. Does this mean you need a PhD in pre-modern history to create a world? No. After all, no one has first-hand experience with fireballs or chain lightning. But you do need to consider the consequences of your choices in order to have your world's history and societies emerge and evolve plausibly. Now let's turn briefly to healing magic. While healing might not affect political power as much, it has massive consequences for survivability and lifespan. Humanity's population crawled forward for thousands of years, sometimes collapsing during plagues like the Black Death. Then improvements in agriculture, sanitation, and medicine during the Industrial Revolution triggered a population boom, over tenfold in less than 3 centuries. A sorcerer who can mend cuts or bind wounds might speed recovery but won't change much else. But what if wizards can reattach limbs? What if mages can bring the dead back to life? You'll have a demographic explosion on your hands, assuming of course there are no other limitations. And fortunately, we're covering limitations in this next section of our video. But before we start that discussion, I realized while editing that I concluded here without broadening the discussion back out again. We talked about martial and medical magic, but the implications can be at least as large for other varieties. The biggest and potentially most earth-shattering are teleportation, portals, and scrying, because these revolutionized the gathering and transformation of people, goods, and information. The Wheel of Time handles the former rather well in the later books. Portals are rediscovered and put to use by Aes Sedai, dramatically changing message delivery, logistics, war, and so on. Let's consider Lord of the Rings, too. If Sauron had better scrying than the Palantir gave him, he'd have immediately found the ring, opened a portal, and flooded the Shire with all 9 Black Riders and a legion of orcs. Game over. The point here is to carefully consider whatever magic exists in your world, including weather magic, enchantments, imbuements, illusions, protections, etc. One thing humanity is very good at, sometimes frighteningly so, is exploiting any tool or resource to the fullest degree. Next, let's talk about who can use magic. This could be broken into 3 parts. The first is simple. How many spellcasters are they? Can everyone wield magic, or only 1 in 1,000? Or is it 1 in 1,000,000? The raw numbers will directly impact everything we talked about concerning magical power. If machine gun or cannon wizards are extremely rare, armies will still fight in ordered ranks because it's unlikely they'll face such a foe. Castles will remain relevant because odds are the enemy won't have breach-blasting sorcerers. If mages can fling nukes, even a handful will have a significant influence, but the flavor will be very different compared to worlds where thousands have this power. In the same way, a single magician who can reattach limbs or bring the dead back to life will become a priceless commodity, and perhaps charge a price of half the kingdom for his services, but he won't turn history on its head on his own. But if every cohort of warriors has its own miracle worker, the ramifications will be enormous. Second, how much effort does it take to cast a spell? If a single fireball requires a week-long ritual, a mage will be useless in pitched battle, but still valuable in a siege. If bringing someone back to life costs the sorceress part of her own life force, that creates natural limits. She's going to weigh each casting very carefully. A lot of RPGs handle this with spells per day, with simpler spells being more numerous than the powerful ones. And here's a related question. Can spells be countered as they're cast, dispelled after they're cast, or is each one permanent? In my world of Isfalinus, sorcerers can counter spells as they happen, provided they're quick enough. That makes magical standoffs common, as each sorcerer waits for his opponent to act, while conventional armies wage their battles. In the same way, the casting of a spell pings their location, so to speak, making them vulnerable not only to counterspelling, but death. Third, who can become a spellcaster? Are they born, made, or both? In the Wheel of Time, channelers of the true source can appear in people of any walk of life. Once found, they are whisked away to Tar Valon, or gentled if they're men. The world of Kelowon follows a similar pattern in Feist's Rift War saga. Some worlds make magic hereditary, passing from parent to child. This is true for the Book of the Ancestors trilogy, and is almost always true in Harry Potter. In other worlds, anyone can learn magic if they've got the right training. An example here is the Wizards of Dragonlance, but not the sorcerers. They get it through bloodlines. Each of these choices carries implications. If anyone can learn through schooling, then the bottleneck is education, which usually means the wealthy will be dominant. The more powerful the magic, the more true this is. Remember my conversation about power? This is doubly true if magic is hereditary. You'll end up with magical dynasties, at least if they're strong enough to assert themselves. In the Rift War saga, the world of Midkemia has fairly weak wizards, which has resulted in them being largely scorned and regarded with suspicion. When magic can appear in any one, the world becomes more, shall we say, dynamic. They might be quickly snatched up like the Great Ones of Kelowon, or the Aes Sedai of the Wheel of Time. If not, they could become real wildcards. A peasant suddenly manifesting the power to tear down a palace, or eliminate a plague, is a recipe for instability. This leads to how societies respond to spellcasters. History shows that societies regulate forces that could destabilize it, be they political, economic, or military. Failure to do so often results in collapse. In the Middle Ages, the Church played a critical role in moderating the violent tendencies of the knightly class, while self-governing craft guilds set standards and controlled their members. The Church is an example of an external control, while the guilds were an internal control. The same could be true for magic. Dragon Age provides an external example where the Templar Order polices mages, while the Wheel of Time provides an internal one. The Aes Sedai established Tar Valon to both govern themselves, just like a guild, but also to reassure the wider world that they won't unleash chaos. Alternatively, if magical power is centered around powerful families for any of the reasons we've discussed already, you're probably going to end up with some sort of oligarchy or constitutional monarchy. Think of the Magna Carta, but instead of the Lords of England, make them the Mages of England. Remember, the key to all of this is twofold. How common are spellcasters, and how powerful are they? The more powerful they are, the more influence they'll be able to exert on society, unless society finds a way to contain them, as the Sanshan did by collaring Aes Sedai and making them slaves. The more common mages are, the wider the range of outcomes. You might end up with a broad distribution of power, like in our Athens example, or a greater propensity for institutions, and so on. The third topic in this Ramifications of Magic trilogy is magical implements. Staffs, wands, rings, swords, potions, and so on. We've got a lot of crossover here with what we've already discussed, but these items have the potential to cause enough trouble on their own that they deserve some attention. The big question here is proliferation. How easy are magic items to make, and how long do they last? Just like raw magical power, the easier and more durable they are, the greater the impact they'll have on your world. There are two critical aspects to discuss. The first is dispersion. Just like worlds with lots of wizards will look very different from worlds with only a few, a world that overflows with magical items behaves differently than one that only has a few legendary artifacts. This is especially true for items that non-casters can use. Suddenly your muggles can get in on the fun and wreak havoc with their enchanted boomsticks. Writers can control proliferation fairly easily. In a novel you can say, "There is only Excalibur," or perhaps have a handful of swords like Glamdring or Grist and Sting, along with 3 rings of the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarven Lords, yada yada yada. But if you're developing a game, especially a computer RPG, you'll likely have a big headache. Characters typically start weak and gear up over time, usually by traveling from starter zone to mid zone to end zone. This leads to the classic absurdity where Town A has 0 magic weapons, Town B has +1 swords stacked like cordwood, and Town C apparently runs a +2 sword factory on the edge of town. Taken as a whole, this is absurd. The heavily enchanted regions would quickly subjugate the mundane ones. If you want internal realism, you'll need to figure out how to overcome this. Perhaps magical items are rarer. Maybe they can't just be bought in a shop. Perhaps they degrade quickly, or are super expensive. There are many potential solutions, but few are simple. This leads us to the second challenge, magical economics. If magic items are common and easy to produce, the market and market forces for them will be huge. You'll have Magic Walmart. If magic items are as common as cell phones in our modern world, what are the implications? Are regulations for their production and sale in place? Maybe the local lord imposes tariffs and demands his cut. Perhaps the Mages Guild holds a monopoly and only sells to vetted customers. Does everyone have the right to bear wands, or is there a 7-day waiting period? Is the production and sale of magical implements the path to wealth for wizards? Or are there better paydays such as politics, the battlefields, or something stranger? Once again, the options are potentially infinite. The key is to consider how each choice impacts the next. As we wrap up this video, I hope I haven't panicked you over gaps and inconsistencies in your world. If you are staring at your world wondering how your setting hasn't already collapsed into a magical singularity, I have 2 bits of encouragement. First, remember that checks and balances can exist for everything. Is magic too powerful? Maybe spellcasting exerts a toll, limiting wizards' power and influence. Are there too many mages concentrated in just a few bloodlines? Perhaps historical upheavals have taught them to self-regulate. For every challenge that threatens to implode your world like a dying sun, there are elements you can introduce to keep it contained. Second, embrace the fun. One of the joys of world building is to assess the logic of your choices and then follow and expand on it. Watching the peoples, societies, and history of your world take on a life of their own. If you haven't already seen the first video, be sure to check it out. I've got it linked below and on the end cards. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe. Also, please leave a comment. It can really help out with the algorithm so this content gets to more people. I'd love to hear what challenges you've come across in your world building. If enough people share theirs, I'll spill the beans on my castle dilemma that helped inspire this video. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Goodbye, happy world building, and have a good day.